Shalom. My name is Aurelia Kane, and I never thought my own father would be the one to humiliate me in front of an entire formation. On my very first day at boot camp, instead of calling me a soldier, he called me a mistake. The laughter of strangers cut deeper than any drill could. I stayed silent because silence was my only shield. What they didn't know was that every cruel word, every dismissal carried me closer to the moment I would turn it all back on them. This isn't just my story, it's about fighting for dignity. Boot camp was supposed to break men into soldiers. My father used it to break me before the first roll call. The air at dawn stung with frost, cutting through layers of cloth and skin alike. My breath hung in front of me, fading fast in the gray haze above the parade ground. Gravel pressed sharp through my boots as I moved to the last row. The name tag stitched on my chest read A. Kane. Not Aurelia, not daughter, not survivor, just another latecomer destined to blend into the noise of formation. I remembered the first time his pen had struck me down psychologically unfit. The words slanted hard across the page. Same signature, same contempt. That verdict had stayed ink on paper for years, a scar without flesh. Now the man who wrote it stood high above us, whistle gleaming in the cold light, the sharp edge of command carved into every syllable. Kolar. Victor Kane carried authority like a second spine. His boots rang on the platform, each step met with rigid posture from the rows beneath him. No one dared blink. He began the roll call, names slicing the air, clipped efficient final. Men barked their presence. Women steadied their shoulders. Silence fell back into place. Then he reached mine. His eyes flicked to the roster, lingered, and in that pause, the morning seemed to still. The breath in my chest locked tight. Then, louder than necessary, his voice lashed out. Should have left this one off the list. The words cut sharper than frost. Waste of space, unfit before the first test. He didn't need to add more. The ripple started on the left, spread fast across the lines, muffled snickers, a cough disguised as laughter, shoulders twitching as heads turned. None of them knew me, but his verdict had already sealed my rank. Invisible, disposable. I didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a glare. My silence was deliberate, a shield heavier than any issued gear. I let the echo pass through me. I kept my eyes fixed forward, spine straight, arms locked tight at my sides. His contempt was my camouflage. I caught the faintest whiff of metal and oil rising from the motor pool, the scent carried on the wind that rushed down the open yard. The morning colors hadn't been raised yet, but my father had already drawn the first line of battle. He thought he'd erased me once with ink, thought he'd erase me again now with ridicule. Around me, boots shuffled, laughter fading back into discipline. The ripple died as quickly as it had begun, but the mark remained. Victor Kane looked down, satisfied, then moved on to the next name without hesitation. To him, I was nothing but dead weight in the file, a shadow standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was wrong. Good. He just gave me the shadow I needed to move unseen. Silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon sharpened breath by breath. The barracks groaned like an old ship, wood and metal rubbing in the damp. Rust ate at bed frames. The mattresses held a sour mineral smell that never quite left your throat. Recruits packed the aisle with duffels and elbows, every voice bouncing off the low ceiling, until orders snapped us quiet again. I chose a lower bunk near the back window where the pane rattled in its frame and the night air could steal in and cool the room. Graves once told me, "Don't chase the spotlight. Be the shadow that sees." I kept my eyes soft, my steps smaller than necessary, and let other people's noise pass over me. If you learn where the noise gathers, you learn where the silence can work. Private Jason Holt spotted the name tag and the empty ribbons. "Ghost clerk," he said loud enough for nearby bunks to hear. "Here to file complaints, not fire rounds." The chuckles that followed were practice, the humor of people trying to pick a safer target than themselves. I didn't answer. I folded my blanket to regulation corners, squared the pillow, and gave the floor nothing to grip. He tried again while lacing his boots. Tell me, clerk, do phantoms salute? I turned just enough that he saw the non-reaction, the still surface that refuses a stone. Something twitched behind his grin. The joke needed purchase. It didn't get it. Emily Vargas watched from the top bunk opposite mine, a cuff of hair falling into one eye. She said nothing, but she noticed which insults drew blood and which tonight slid away harmless. Afternoon bled into evening drills, rifle strip-downs, cadence runs a lecture inside a cinderblock room that smelled like wet chalk. Sweat dried into a crust on collars. By lights out, the barracks had settled into that tired orchestra of coughs, snores, and whispered bravado. I lay still until the last rustle faded. Then I reached under my rack, drew out the folder stamped with my name, and opened it on my knees. There was almost nothing inside. One sheet. Expedited clearance, no prior assignments attached, no psych record, no fitness evals. A skeleton of a life fast-tracked, unexamined, and mysteriously approved. Someone had cut a doorway through the wall for me and left no fingerprints. I traced the edges of the paper with a finger, feeling for impressions, for pressure marks where a pen might have dug too hard. In the fluorescent spill from the hall, the paper flashed a watermark I recognized from command offices, real, official, and strangely out of place here. I flipped the folder, searched for a second page, a clip note, anything. Empty. Boots thudded past the door. A flashlight stuttered across the ceiling, then vanished. Emily shifted above me, the springs giving one complaint. In the quiet, I took inventory of the room, the cadence manual reciter 2 bunks down, the restless kicker who twitched through dreams, the recruit who stored chocolate under his pillow like contraband hope. People wear their tells openly when they think no one is watching. I have always watched. Jason muttered once in his sleep something about a test and a drop zone, then turned over and went silent. The nickname he gave me was already traveling the room, sticking in corners. Words are tools. Tools can be redirected. I slid the folder back beneath the frame and let the blankness taste the dust. Someone pulled strings. Someone with access and a reason. It could be mercy. It could be a leash. Either way, a door is still a door, and you decide how to walk through it. If my file is blank, then I can write the ending myself. You can't dismantle a system without tracing its wires. Tonight, I started pulling. Rain paired the barracks' stink to metal and wet canvas. Bunks settled into sleep. The aisle was a tunnel of boots and folded wool. I sat cross-legged on the lower rack beneath a rattling window notebook, open spine, aligned with the bed frame so the pen wouldn't jump when the wind hit. The bulb over the door hummed, ghost echo. The tattoo warmed my back, a phantom cable. Graves taught us to track current, to memorize corridors and shifts. I pressed the pen to the page and drew a map. Reveille to Chow Range time drill blocks, cleaning lights out. Crosshatches for instructors, arrows for transfers, dotted lines for the hour after midnight when supervision thinned. The grid filled. Habits never lie. Emily Vargas moved the catwalk between bays, and I kept the strokes small and neat, a cartographer of other people's tells. From the inner pocket, I drew a flat black drive Mercer's gift slid across a tray days ago without a word. I killed wireless and fed the USB home. The screen brightened to a directory with no names, only numbers. I opened the first. Grain swam across the feed, a cold snow. The angle was high fisheye. A caption, Tier 4. 4 recruits blindfolded knelt inside open metal crates. Hands secured. A strobe painted faces in sick intervals. Someone off-frame tapped a baton against steel. 1, 2, 3, then stopped. The silence was the drill. A door opened at the edge, a figure entered, clipboard hugged to chest. No insignia, just the leisure of authority. The recruits flinched when the air moved. On the far wall, block letters flared. If you're not ready to be forgotten, you're not ready to be used. My throat tightened. We trained soldiers. Graves said not tools. This wasn't training. It was subtraction. Strip the self-sand hesitation reward obedience that looks like calm. The file jumped cut another scene. Isolation boxes, a slit of soup through a tray hole. Exercises repeated until the body obeyed before the thought. The timestamps were recent. Current program, current base. Obsidian's successor. Not rumor. Not ghost story. Alive 2 buildings away. I paused the feed and leaned back until the bed frame cooled my spine. The barracks spoke its night noises, rain breath, a squeak of springs. I wrote the room number, the timestamp, the label. Then I sketched the path from here to there, a line along the outer fence, 2 cameras with dead zones if the cloud cover held. Not tonight. Tonight was for study, not exposure. You don't pull a live wire with bare hands. I copied the clip to a hidden partition, encrypted it, then wiped the cache. The cursor blinked like a metronome. On a new page, I wrote the sentence from the wall in small letters, once in ink and once in pencil to feel the weight. Beneath it, a single word, no. A bunk 3 down coughed. Someone whispered a prayer. Time slid. I shut the lid and waited for the drive's light to still before easing it free and tucking it beneath the seam in my blouse. Rain thickened. The bulb near the door flickered, held, then fell to dull orange. I almost missed the scrape. Paper across concrete is a quiet thing if you want it to be. It slid under the door, nudged by 2 unseen fingers, kissed the aisle's grit, and stopped against my boot. I didn't look right away. I let the room breathe once, twice. Then I drew the folded slip into shadow and opened it by touch. Policy won't save you. They called me a ghost. They hadn't seen the ink yet. Heat rattled off the gravel pit behind the motor pool, a white glare that flattened every edge. Recruits circled us in a loose ring boots, crunching helmets tilted against the noon sun. Sweat crawled under my collar. Jason Holt rolled his shoulders and smirked like a man warming up a rumor. He bounced once on the balls of his feet and raised his guard. "Come on, ghost clerk," he said. "Do you file punches in triplicate or just misplace them?" Graves laughed once. "That mark will outlive orders." The memory flickered like shade. I set my stance and let Jason talk. Taunts spend a fighter's wind faster than sprints. He lunged. Dust jumped. His jab was quick but came home high. The right hand followed wild. I slid inside the arc and touched his wrist, turning it like a valve. He stumbled past. The ring of bodies hissed. Jason swore, spun, and came again. Knees first, elbows sharp with frustration. The second I needed opened like a door on loose hinges. I cut low and swept. His legs left the earth. He hit with a grunt that bounced off the motor pool wall. Even before he landed, I felt his hand claw at my collar, desperate for an anchor. Fabric bit my neck and tore sideways. Sunlight poured straight into the wound he opened. The tattoo ghost echo's sigil breathed in the glare, the dark curve, the small break. The clean line that Graves traced once with a fingertip in a room that smelled of oil and rain. The ring went still. Mouths closed. A pen might have signed me out, but ink of another kind had never faded. Silence gripped the yard. I heard a far compressor sigh, a bird scissor the sky, the slow tick of hot metal. On the catwalk above, Colmer Victor Kane froze with one hand on the rail as if the steel had grown teeth. There was calculation in his stillness. There was also fear. It vibrated the way a string does when a wrong note is struck. At the edge of the ring stood Jen Thomas Mercer, arms folded, cap low against the blaze. He looked like a man parsing a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He stepped forward without hurry, each footfall, an eraser across the laughter this place had loved. He reached the line, removed his cap, and in a voice that didn't need to rise said, "We salute her." Boots snapped. Not all at once. The sound began near Mercer and raced the circle like flame hunting dry grass. Helmets bobbed spines, straightened palms, found brims and brows. Jason, still on his knees, swallowed hard and followed eyes fixed on a point beyond me he could not define. The salute did what orders hadn't it rewrote the room. For a heartbeat, I was nowhere, and everywhere in the barracks night with the rain in a shuttered hangar years ago in the moment, a blast should have ended me, and didn't. The ink cooled against the heat, and I stood inside a past that refused to die, and a future learning how to breathe. Mercer's gaze met mine for a fraction you could measure with a single pulse. There was recognition, not pity. Duty, not spectacle. He replaced his cap with the care of a man returning a flag to its pole. I lowered my eyes, not in shame, but in choice. Let them look until their questions hurt. Let the story they were given shiver in the sun and crack. Somewhere, a whistle tried to claim the moment and failed. The heat pressed down, and the ring shifted the kind of collective breath a body takes before it chooses a new posture. I felt sweat track along my spine and vanish at the mark. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't smile. The point was never triumph. It was proof laid in sunlight, undeniable and quiet. Now. Victor grips railing jaw tight, unable to stop the wave. Flags aren't always fabric. Sometimes they're a line of code hidden in plain sight. The admin corridor hummed neon over the kiosk, blinking like a tired eyelid. After midnight, the base felt hollow boots far off a door, catching rain ticking through the block wall. I slid my card-killed wireless, watched regulation blue bloom on the screen. Keys were polished by 1,000 hands. Dust proved no one cared. Victor's pen had once leaned hard enough to push me off a life. One stroke, and I was unfit on paper. Tonight, I would lay a line he couldn't grip, not fabric, but signal a record the system would be forced to hear. The diagnostic field pulsed. I fed it the quiet truths training blocks, drifting 15 minutes late 3 nights out of 5. The same instructor scheduled on 2 ranges at once. Tier 4 cameras failing every 3rd night at 0017. Isolation drills that ended with recruits returned without notation or debrief. Times, rooms, reference codes. Keys clicked like rain. I set the flag to anonymous routing, braided its threads across separate audit streams, left a tripwire in an old maintenance table no one checked. If anyone tried to bury the flag, the burying would register as another anomaly. Working late. Clerk Jason's reflection slid across the glass before his voice arrived. He came from the hall's blur, hands in pockets, smirk building to meet the moment. Filing ghost complaints. Curfew doesn't stop paperwork, I said, eyes on the screen. The insult gathered, then stalled. The neon found the seam of my collar. Maybe he remembered the noon glare on my back, the ink that had stopped a crowd mid-breath. His posture loosened by a degree a sergeant wouldn't see. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, not a threat. Just the knowledge that he wasn't either. "I'm recording patterns." I logged the cadence of loss protocol where hesitation was punished like treason. You don't beat men like him by shouting from the yard. You make their records argue with themselves. And if the records lie, they already do. I threaded another route, salted the payload with a checksum, buried a copy where only dust and forgotten code live. He exhaled. "I called you ghost clerk," he said, as if testing the weight of his own words. Guess I was filing the wrong story. The flicker painted him older and younger at once. Is it safe, trace resistant? If someone smothers this, the smothering shows up as noise in 3 offices. Jason glanced down the corridor where darkness built its own order. "Then I didn't see you," he said. A beat. Softer. "And I saw the tattoo." He let the statement sit like a folded flag and stepped back into shadow. I filled the final field with the smallest sign, 6-second delays between whistle and command during loss protocol repeated across 3 platoons under the same hand. Small threads hold large sails. I locked the packet and pressed send. The terminal muttered a bar sliding to green. New text appeared, plain as a door. Flag received. Routing internal review. Attribution none. I lifted my hands from the keys like from a clean stitch. The neon steadied. I kept breathing. I signed out, let the screen fall to patient blue. A heartbeat later, a small icon butted in the corner read as a pinprick insistent in the quiet. Leaving it would only make it louder. I opened it. You're getting close. Not every drill is built to make you stronger. Some are designed to make you break. The sun came down harsh, turning the training field into a sheet of light that stabbed the eyes and burned through cloth. Dust swirled in slow spirals under boots. We stood in two ragged lines, rifle-stacked helmets steaming while Victor Kane prowled in front of us with a folder under one arm. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't invite questions, only fear. Graves once warned me real leaders build, pretenders destroy. The words returned as I watched Victor's shoulders tighten before he picked his target. A young lieutenant recruit near the front, barely out of school chin, trembling as he fought to look composed. Victor's eyes fixed on that weakness the way a hawk finds motion in tall grass. Step forward, he barked. The recruit obeyed, knuckles whitening around his cap. Victor handed him a scenario sheet, the kind meant to test leadership under fire. Evacuate wounded, secure supply, redeploy squad. The boy's voice shook as he read the first line. Victor cut him off. Too slow, he said. In the field, hesitation is death. The recruit swallowed, tried again, words tumbling faster this time. His answer barely formed before Victor snatched the sheet back and waved it in the air for everyone to see. This is the face of failure. Mark it well. He opened the folder, pulled the recruit's personnel file, and in one smooth motion ripped it in half. Paper tore like bone. The sound carried farther than his words. He dropped the pieces into the dust where they fluttered weakly before settling. You will never lead. Not here. Not anywhere. You are unfit. The silence was jagged. No one moved. The young man stood, frozen color draining from his skin until his knees gave way. He fell, hard dust rising around him, cap rolling from his grasp. His breath came shallow, each gasp a witness to the weight of public humiliation. I stood still, notebook open against my thigh, pen waiting. I wrote the date, the time, the name, the words exactly as he spoke them. My silence was louder than any protest. To argue now would only feed his cruelty. To record was to sharpen the blade for later. Around us, recruits shifted uneasily. Some glanced at me, perhaps remembering the salute days earlier. The ink burned into their memory. Others stared at the dirt, unwilling to challenge the hierarchy that bound them. Victor scanned their faces, satisfied that fear had rooted deeper than loyalty. The young lieutenant's file years of training evaluations hopes lay shredded at Victor's boots. No one dared to pick it up. Victor turned away, dismissing him as though he had never existed, moving down the line in search of another victim to prove his power. The boy's shoulders caved. His hands shook as he gathered the scraps of his future from the ground, clutching them like fragments of a broken flag. He tried to stand tall, but the collapse was complete. Every recruit watching saw how easy it was to erase a man with nothing more than authority and disdain. I wrote the final line beneath my notes and closed the book with care. Graves had been right, pretenders destroy. And my father was still destroying one life at a time. If this is leadership, then silence will be my battlefield. Masks can hide faces, but not forever. Tonight, his started to tear. The visitors' lounge wore old bandage colors, beige walls, limp flags, a vending machine that rejected crumpled bills. Fluorescents buzzed above plastic chairs placed for obedience, not comfort. Families formed little islands, flowers, cookies, laughter, trying too hard. I stood by the bulletin board, rosters, chapel hours, a resilience poster curling at the corners. That slip warned me policy wouldn't save us. It said nothing about silence. I held burnt coffee and watched the door breathe people in. Clara arrived first. City perfume rode her coat like a disguise. She saw me, paused, then let her gaze slip past as if the board deserved attention. Eric followed, brochure, perfect boots, bright hairline, crisp. Pride lived in his posture. He searched not for me, but for him. Caller Victor Kane entered last, presence settling the room like gravity. He clasped Eric's shoulder. "There he is," he announced. The real soldier. Heads turned on cue. A couple clapped before deciding why. Clara smiled for the show. "No question, for me sleep bruises anything." Victor's eyes passed over mine like a tide. To an older man by the urn he added gentle and lethal. "Some people are built for this. Others, try." His hand tightened on Eric, a signature without ink. A chaplain drifted by. A toddler attempted a salute. I set the cup down and tasted an old lesson spit the poison. Builders work slow, destroyers work loud. Visiting hour collapsed. Dusk bruised the sky. Lamps blinked to life with a moth-sung hum. Clara folded into a sedan turning. Eric saluted a future he believed owed him. Victor took the long angle across the lot so our paths nearly crossed and didn't. The barracks corridor kept the day's heat. Boots slept in rows under bunks. I was halfway to my rack when Jason Holt stepped from the laundry doorway, his smirk missing its footing. "Walk," he said. We drifted toward the rear door, a fan pushing warm air at our knees. He checked both ends of the hall, then pulled a cheap recorder, scuffed button paint gone. "You heard him tonight," he said. "About real soldiers. I thought it was theater." It wasn't. He stared at the device. Office door was cracked. He was with an aide. Your name came up. He pressed play. The fan's drone filled a beat. Then Victor's voice cut through, measured, efficient. "Remove the name from the elite cohort. I don't care what the metrics say. Mark the file unfit. We don't need that kind of risk near command. Paper, a pen, a chair." Jason stopped it. "I wish I hadn't heard it," he said. "Now I don't get to pretend. You recorded it anyway. I don't know if that makes me brave or late." He set the recorder in my palm, careful not to touch. "I called you ghost clerk. It was easy." He swallowed. "Mocking you was easier than seeing the truth." The words didn't echo. They settled. I slid the device into the inner pocket where another truth already lived. Outside, moths battered the lamp glass with the stubborn grace of bad ideas. "Keep your head down," he said. "Whatever you're doing is moving people who don't like being moved." "They don't have to move," I said. "They just have to see." We had taken 3 steps when the building changed key. Authority carries its own weather. The corridor cooled. A shadow unstitched itself at the far end and lengthened toward us. I didn't need a face to name the cadence. Years of parade grounds teach you feet. The stride was Victor's unhurried final. Jason's shoulders rose, then settled. We didn't speak. The fan kept spinning, indifferent as sky. Victor's footsteps echo down the hall as Jason and I freeze. Pens don't lie. Their pressure bleeds across years. The archive room sulked at the end of a corridor nobody loved. Dust lived here in layers. The bulb ticked between amber and tremor, making folders breathe. I closed the door until the latch kissed and let night settle on the shelves. Above, rain worked the gutters. The first time Victor pushed me off the ledger, the pen bit like a blade, slanted letters, a flourish that looked like virtue from far away. I could see it with eyes closed, the lean, the pressure, the certainty that decided futures without touching their faces. I steadied my hands on a drawer and pulled. I found the year by smell as much as logic paper grows, a kind of old, only certain seasons teach. The folder came free on the third try, corners, bent edges, browned. I slid it onto a reading table and opened carefully, the way you open injuries that think they've healed. There it was, psychologically unfit, a verdict shaped like a gavel, stamped with an authority that eats appeal for breakfast. I angled the page to the light, not to read the words, I knew them, but to listen to the strokes. Ink leaves relief if you slide your thumb. I felt the troughs where the nib dug in the swell on the final hook. I set it down and went hunting for the twin. 12 years younger toward the front, 12 years older toward the back. The second folder resisted, then relented with a shiver that lifted dust like breath. Another report nearly clean proud of its emptiness. The same 2 words. The same signature beneath. I lined the pages edge to edge like a mirror. Same slant. Same impatience in the K. The downstroke on the T, like a hammer that loved its work. Even the tremor at the end microscopic but there where control met the limit of muscle. Pens don't lie. Flesh repeats itself. The bulb buzzed threatening dark. I drew a pencil line through the loops and arcs mapping pressure like topography. Graves made us trace shoe prints until we could name a gate from a smudge. This was the same science, only crueler. My father had buried me twice, and his hand left the shovel marks. The door creaked. I flattened to the shadow of the shelf, breath snagged high in my chest. Boots in the corridor. A question. Another voice. Young, apologetic. "Sorry, ma'am." A clatter of metal, then a spill of gear canteen skittering the floor into view. "Emily." She let the chaos bloom just enough to pull the officer's attention past the glass. "I'll pick it up. I got it," she said, bright and flustered. Footfalls receded, annoyed but persuaded. I stayed still until the air forgot me. Then I slid to the table, gathered the pages with palms that didn't feel like mine, and looked again, because you check a miracle twice. Same hand, same harm. I folded copies and slipped them into the inner pocket where the recorder lived against my ribs. The originals I returned exactly as found, an honest lie for a dishonest ledger. My notebook took the rest dates, form numbers. The tear in the lower left margin, a stain like tea. Rain tightened on the roof. I thought about boys on the range tomorrow rehearsing obedience, about the wall in Tier 4 with its pretending wisdom, about how a system survives by convincing you every cut is surgery. Some cuts are just violence with paperwork. The bulb steadied as if it never faltered. I pressed fingers to paper one last time, feeling the canyon of that signature and how the ink had clawed fibers and stayed. Then I clutched the pages to my chest and refused the urge to shake. A shadow lingers at the glass window watching. Every signature leaves a scar, and the deeper we go, the darker the truth becomes. Don't miss the next chapter of this fight for justice. Subscribe now and walk with me into the shadows that still remain. To catch a thief, you let him think the vault is unguarded. The computer room pulsed with the steady hum of servers, each machine a quiet heart beating green light across the tiled floor. Rain rattled faintly against the far vents, muffled by steel and insulation, while the overhead bulb flickered like it wanted to surrender. I slipped inside between shifts, door latch easing shut, leaving only the drone of cooling fans and the rhythmic sweep of digital breath. The chair by the terminal was crooked, a cup ring halo burned into its desk. I left it there, a performance of carelessness. Graves's words guided me: never strike when they're ready, make them believe you've slipped. I opened a training variance memo and planted a flaw, a committee name that did not exist, a routing code just one digit off. Bait. Into the log, I embedded scripts mirrored to a hidden partition, hotkeys armed for captures. Notebook open, I copied the terminal clock's seconds because numbers are loyal where men are not. The door sighed again. Soft soles crossed the linoleum, too deliberate for a recruit, too hurried for a senior officer. The aide moved like he belonged in forgotten corners, unmarked sleeves, face blurred by routine. His eyes darted to the screen where the false report waited. Hook set. He slid into the chair, shoulders folding forward with muscle memory of secrecy. Logan flashed a generic ID designed to mask real hands. His cursor traced the path I had baited. Audits, overrides, waivers like a moth chasing lamp heat. He deleted the variants, polished the language, appended the dull phrase, "Bureaucrats worship," refiled per compliance. His wrist moved with the confidence of someone who has done this 100 times under another's command. My hotkey snapped the pane mid-breath. Again. Again. Logs blossomed with his footprint, IP string, timestamp, user ID. Evidence that breathed without me. He shifted folders, reaching lost protocol records. A note once pinned to faulty equipment vanished, replaced with no fault found. I caught the screen again, pulse iron steady though my jaw clenched hard enough to ache. The aide glanced toward the wired glass of the hall, saw nothing return to work. He opened personnel index, typed 3 letters KAN, stopped before the final stroke, as if the name carried teeth. His hesitation burned longer than any confession. Orders drove him, but fear pricked curiosity. He signed out with neat precision, adjusted the chair with a practiced knee, and vanished through the door like a shadow. I slid forward, air still vibrating from his absence. The audit log glowed, edits fresh as wounds. Screens captured, saved, twice hashed, then buried on the drive at my ribs. My notebook recorded everything else, sequence, time, gesture. Evidence does not need anger, it needs patience. And tonight, patience had found its prey. Climax isn't an explosion. Sometimes it's a trail of numbers aligned so perfectly that no lie can bend them. I purged traces, reset the system, left the chair exactly where he had nudged it. Darkness folded in as I reached for the switch. The monitor bloomed once more, envelope icon pulsing red. No sender. No subject. Just a single line waiting like a knife point. Stop now, or vanish again. Proof means nothing until someone with rank locks it in a folder they can't ignore. Mercer's office held the afternoon like a held breath. Blinds cut the light into careful bands. Dust floated as if ordered to parade. On the desk lay a folder the color of a wound, bright crimson, impossible to misplace. I closed the door until the latch settled, stood at attention long enough to feel it in my bones. Then stepped forward and set 3 items on the blotter. First, Jason's recorder's scuffed plastic. The play button rubbed pale. Inside it, Victor's voice calm as a metronome, instructing an aide to erase me from any path that led upward. Second, 2 sheets that matched like a confession across years, psychologically unfit, same slant, same pressure, Victor's hand burying me twice. Third, the system log captured in green, certainty, IP timestamp, user, alias, each line a rung no excuse could saw through. Mercer didn't touch them at once. He watched me first, the way a man listens for weather. Then he picked up the recorder and pressed play. Victor's voice filled the narrow room, courteous as it sentenced. Mercer let it run out, rewound, listened again to the line that named my fate as policy, not preference. His jaw stayed still. Only his eyes hardened. He read the signatures next, tilting each page to the light thumbs near the margins, never over the marks. When he reached the downstroke that proved sameness, he exhaled once, a small surrender to fact. He slid the sheets side by side until their loops mirrored, then looked up at me with the quiet of a man who knows truth and proof are kin, but not twins. Finally, the logs. He scanned the audit prints like maps, tracing the route from bait to edit, noting the clock in the corner and the matching time I had handwritten in my notebook. "You cross-checked," he said. I nodded. Twice. The corners of his mouth almost moved, the nearest thing he allowed to approval. For a moment there was only the tick of the vent and the soft scrape of paper under his hands. The red folder weighted lid open like a mouth that would swallow or speak. Mercer gathered the 3 threads, squared them with a gesture that belonged to ceremony, and lowered them into the crimson. The metal tabs closed with a sound heavier than rank. At graduation, he said, palm on the folder, we let truth speak louder than orders. The line was measured but carried the weight of an oath. For a breath, I stood inside that sentence and felt its architecture hold. He wrote my name on the tab letters, clean, unhurried. Years had passed since I'd seen my name entered for anything other than absence. Printed in black on red, it looked like something rescued from a fire. I didn't reach for it. I let the site do the work my voice didn't need to do. "You understand what follows," Mercer added. "He will flail. He will try to break you in public so he doesn't have to break in private." "He already tried," I said. A pause, then a nod. He turned the folder so its spine faced the door, aligning a compass. Then we stop trying and start showing. I retrieved my notebook, leaving only the evidence that now had a guardian. Sun stripes climbed the wall. Office smelled of paper. My hand touched the door. Mercer said my name. Not rank, not title. Only my name, and the sound of it told me the scale had shifted. I dipped my head and stepped into the corridor. The light was thinner there, colors leached by hour. Recruits passed with mops and chatter. I closed the door softly as if quiet could guard what we'd begun, and started down the hall, air cooling toward the exit now. Leaving Mercer's office, I catch Victor's glare at the corridor's end. Sometimes to be seen, you must first take the last row. Sun rose thin and pale over the parade ground, painting the gravel with thin fire. Breath plumed from 100 mouths. Boots found their squares. Metal ticked in buckles. I walked the edge of formation until the ranks swallowed me, then slid into the back line where shadows lingered. The last row is where noise dies and sight survives. Mercer warned me, stay small until truth speaks. I tucked the warning like a blade and fixed my gaze ahead. Victor's platform loomed like a keel. Officers clustered at his shoulders, caps, angled faces unreadable from the field. He looked taller than the rail, chin high, the sun plating his jaw in brass. Triumph fit him too well. I let the breath in my chest rise and fall until it remembered its work. Jason drifted in 2 files over expression scrubbed blank, the kind learned after mocking the wrong person. At the last cadence before stillness, he stepped half a pace back, met my eye, and let his hand brush mine as if correcting balance. A wafer of plastic pressed against my palm, tiny and warm, a backup drive. I folded it beneath the seam of my glove. He faced forward, shoulders aligning to the drill. Emily Vargas stood 1 space to my left, smaller than the rifle she carried, her gaze skating the arc of officers. She didn't look at me. Looking is noise. But her mouth moved a fraction. "We'll follow your eyes." She breathed less sound than breath. The promise slid into the cold and was gone. Colors went up. The flag billowed hard, the band trying to be larger than the day. The yard settled into its script. Names would be read, numbers praised, legends polished. I flexed my fingers around the wafer until its edge bit and stayed. Behind my eyes, the plan arranged itself again in quiet lines. Mercer's folder. The recorder's voice. 2 signatures that matched like a mirror. The log that refused to blink first. Proof doesn't shout. It waits for a room to hush. Victor paced the rail, slow and proprietary, surveying the geometry he believed was his. He paused often, then moved again, lips shaping corrections only he could hear. I felt the old weight of his verdicts settle across the field the way weather lays on a valley. My jaw wanted to clench. I let it loosen. Rage advertises. Purpose stays dressed. A bark rolled down the rows. Rifles rose and fell. The bleachers leaned in. Somewhere, a mother stifled a sob. The wind carried oil and starch and metal from the pool. I counted beats in my head to steady the tide of blood in my ears. 6, then 6 again. Stillness is a discipline learned the hard way. Jason's knuckles whitened on his sling, then eased. Emily shifted her heel half an inch to settle a stone. We were small, and smallness is power when the other side understands spectacle. From here, the platform looked less like a throne and more like a witness stand waiting to be named. The band cut. A hush traveled the ground. Victor stepped to the microphone with the careful pleasure of a man arriving at his own legend. He let the silence deepen until it felt like obedience to him. He tasted it, then smiled his quarter smile, the one he used when he was certain the room was his. He cleared his throat. The flag snapped. Far off, a door slammed. He scanned the formation, slow, cold, triumphant, and I felt the old life tilt toward collision. My hand rested open at my thigh palm, tingling where the drive lay hidden. The morning held its breath, and the ranks held theirs with it. Somewhere a gull carved the light and the flag snapped bright as a blade. An aide leaned into Victor's ear. Mercer has the red folder. They expected applause. Silence became the loudest verdict. The noon light hammered the bleachers until faces blurred to copper. Brass and braid glinted. Families held programs like shields. The band had fallen quiet. Victor stood at the podium with that rehearsed calm he wore like rank voice tuned to carry past doubt. He spoke of readiness and tradition. He tasted the crowd's eagerness and fed it back. Tier 4 left its mark on my memory. If you're not ready to be forgotten, you're not ready to be used. I let the line settle like grit and kept to the last row, the drive flat under my glove, Jason and Emily steady in view. Mercer's warning lived under my ribs stay small until truth speaks. Victor turned the final page and lifted a thin folder that looked embarrassed by its own weight. There is a file with no commendation, he said, letting his gaze skim the rows until it almost touched me, then refused. No record to review, no remarks to give. Blank. The word struck metal. A few laughs died. I kept my chin level. Silence is staging. He set the folder aside like a broken pen. Applause waited and did not come. The air tightened. A captain shifted. Somewhere a child hiccuped, then stilled. The microphone breathed. A second shadow joined the first. Jennifer. Mercer walked out from the line of officers to the table. His cap came off. He laid a bright crimson folder at the center and opened it so the top page faced the sun. The crowd leaned. He stayed angled toward the audience as if motion would confess anticipation. Mercer shifted the microphone with 2 fingers. Before we proceed, he said the record will speak. He turned the folder toward us, and the first page showed a photo that had lived only in rooms that denied it existed. My face in field gear ash at the collar, a number charred in the corner. Under it, the printed status presumed KIA, Operation Ghost Echo. So breath fled, flags stilled. I felt the past reach for me and refused its grip. Mercer kept his attention on the paper. He lifted 2 more pages. Identical verdicts, years apart. Psychologically unfit, he read voice even 12 years apart, same hand. He tilted the sheets so the loops and downstrokes caught the light, then set them beside the photo so sameness was visible to the back row. If a story remains blank, sometimes it was erased. Victor's jaw pulsed. The mic caught his teeth. His aide stepped back as if gravity had shifted. I tasted metal and let it pass. Mercer pressed a key on a console. A portable screen flickered above the podium. Grainy footage rolled a room labeled Tier 4. Recruits blindfolded in metal crates. The strobe. A baton tapped steel in a rhythm of dread. On the wall, the line we learned to fear. If you're not ready to be forgotten, you're not ready to be used. Gasps rippled. A father near the front stood as if to shield a grown child. The camera cut to the audit pane I had printed time codes aligning with the clock in the corner. A cursor erased a variant smoothed a lie-replaced fault with no fault found. IP, timestamp, user ID, 3 notes of a chord that cannot be unheard. The band held their instruments like a hymn might start. The sun slid higher, bleaching shade from the gravel, but quiet held like frost. Somewhere, a guidon creaked on its pole. A recruit coughed, stopped, and pressed lips. I felt the last row breathe as one. Even fear knew to keep time. Mercer closed the folder softly, sealing a wound. He named no traitor or abuse. He let the paper speak. Then he stepped back from the mic, removed his cap once more, and faced the formation. "This is Aurelia Kane," he said, and the words did not tremble. "We salute her. Climax isn't a crash, it's a pivot." The first boot snapped like a clean hinge Jason's, then Emily's, and the sound flared outward row by row, a wave rewriting ground. The bleachers rose, then steadied. Silence became applause. I did not raise a hand. I held the line. Beside the dais, Victor's face learned a new color and could not keep it. Jason, Emily, then hundreds of boots snap in unison. Victor's face drains of control. He didn't fall because I struck him. He fell because truth no longer needed me to shout. The ceremony ground held its breath. Victor stared into the wave. He could no longer surf the podium's mic, catching the dry click of his swallow. At roll call, he had mocked me. Now the crowd remembered the shape of that contempt before he opened his mouth. He stepped forward, spine like a bayonet. "This is a mischaracterization," he said. "Selective evidence. Operational context." The words stumbled as the screen behind him froze on the audit pane, the cursor mid-edit, the timestamp welded to the corner. Mercer didn't raise his voice. "Per regulation, I am initiating a formal investigation into Colonel Victor Kane's conduct, including file manipulation, unlawful conditioning, and interference with promotions. Effective immediately, you are relieved of command pending inquiry." Victor laughed, once short the sound of a hinge when a door swells. "You can't." The aides who orbited him drifted to safer gravity. No wind remained to rescue him. Recruits stood as still as verdicts. Their stares weighed heavier than orders, a discipline born in 1 minute that years had failed to teach. Victor reached for the microphone. Mercer laid 2 fingers on the lectern edge. No threat, only boundary. "The record will be preserved," he continued. "The Inspector General has been notified." A captain read from a tablet confirming receipt and chain of custody time stamped to the second. "He is my son Victor," said the confession, landing crooked. "I protected the integrity of the program." "You protected yourself," Mercer said. "The program endures without your shadow." He faced the formation. "Your careers will not be measured by silence." I did not speak. In the distance, the band members lowered their instruments as if motion might spill what the day had balanced. The screen dimmed to black. The red folder did not. Colonel Mercer said at last, and the single word carried its last meaning. "You will surrender insignia and sidearm." The protocol officer stepped forward. Victor's hands hovered, then obeyed, metal unclipped with tiny traitorous sounds, each bright piece becoming plain metal in a tray. Memory threw me to the first morning the roster paused, the joke he placed like a boot on my neck. The echo faded against the present. I did not need to answer the old humiliation. The field answered it. He turned toward the formation face carved into a mimicry of stone. Mercer waited. A path as old as rank stood between us, narrow and final. The bleachers did not cheer. They held stillness like water in cupped hand. A gull tilted above the flag and thought better of landing. I felt time stretch thin, audible, as if every second were a wire drawn through fire. Victor's eyes searched the ranks for a loyal nod and found none. Mercer's profile was cut from restraint. He gave the moment back to the field. When power loses its echo, it learns how small its voice has always been. I remembered the old corridor smell of metal and chalk, the door where his judgment had once pinned me, and how quiet had trained me to outlast it. He tried not to take it. Pride stalled where courage should stand. Then, as if the body knew what the mind refused, his right hand rose slow as a clock with failing springs. The salute formed in pieces, shoulder, elbow, brow. It reached me late, stripped of pride, an instrument without song. It was not respect. It was surrender. I let my arms hang and the moment measure him, not me. The crowd did not shout. They counted each inch as if the distance were a sentence. He lowered his hand the way a man sets down a weight he cannot carry. The tray closed. The IG officer spoke a date. The wind returned light as a witness who has said enough. I stand motionless, thinking I already stood taller than his salute. Legacies aren't sealed in blood, they're written in protections that outlive us. The boardroom smelled of paper coffee gone cold and rain working the windows. Days had passed, but the parade ground still rang in the soles of my boots. We sat around a table wide enough to hold a map of mistakes we'd filed. Mercer rested a forearm near the red folder now banded and tagged, while the oversight committee arranged pens with care. Graves once told me, "Train soldiers, not tools." The words steadied my breath. A colonel cleared his throat to begin, but Mercer spoke first. "Effective today," he said, "the successor to Obsidian is dissolved." The sentence landed without fanfare, a clean incision. Pages clicked, signatures cued, a recorder's red dot blinked to mark the end of a program that pretended to be a doctrine. I kept my eyes on the glass, watching the rain separate and reform like units breaking ranks. "Dissolution is not enough," Mercer added. "Damage propagates." He opened a thin binder the color of ash. "We are adopting a permanent safeguard, the Graves Protocol." The room shifted its weight. A lawyer leaned forward, scent of ink bright as ozone. Mercer read the core: an explicit ban on identity erasure, on coercive conditioning, on any practice that treats personnel as expendable instruments, mandatory audit trails, external review, whistleblower shelters. "If you're not ready to protect their names," he said, "you're not ready to command." The committee chair nodded, once relief and reluctance sharing the same line of her mouth. "Unanimous," she said, tapping the table. A stamp thudded. The protocol moved from proposal to rule. I felt the air lighten thin enough to notice the ache under it. Then came the final item. "Ms. Kane," the chair said, "your record is corrected. We offer reinstatement with rank commensurate to service, retroactive benefits, and command track at your discretion." Eyes turned toward me with professional warmth, the kind that leaves a draft at the neck. For a heartbeat, I saw the barracks again, metal cots, the notebook, the girl who whispered, "We'll follow your eyes." Graves taught me that legacies live or die by who they make room for. A chair can be a prize, or a gate. I thought of the recruits who would never see this room, of the ones whose names arrived late to their own lives. My pulse steadied. I don't need a title. I need a door for those left outside. The chair's pen froze mid-letter. Someone's breath caught and did not bother to hide itself as a cough. Mercer didn't smile. He adjusted the binder until its corners squared with the world. "Then we'll fund the door," he said. "Independent training, counseling, placement support. A name that is not a unit and never a secret." The committee scribbled. Money moved from columns to purposes. A future stopped being an outline. I signed where they asked me to sign, acknowledgement, not allegiance. Outside, the rain settled into a steady rhythm, and the city answered with gutters and streets below. The red folder remained on the table, heavy and useful now only as a witness. When the session adjourned, chairs whispered against tile and the room emptied to murmurs. I gathered my notebook. Mercer waited by the door, his profile turned to the window as if watching the weather. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The work had shifted from punishment to protection, from noise to design. Mercer slides me an envelope, Graves's last handwritten note. "Justice isn't medals or parades. Sometimes it's a roof for the forgotten." Dawn broke in pale bands over the coastal edgelight, crawling across the corrugated skin of the abandoned hangar. Salt hung in the air, sharp as memory, filling my lungs with the reminder that even ruins can smell like beginnings. The padlock groaned under my hand. Metal yielded, and with a push, the doors yawned wide. The interior swallowed the sunlight at first, then surrendered, rafters glowing in gold as dust climbed into beams like voices finally permitted to speak. Jason stood beside me, his face still carrying the raw marks of mockery turned to faith. Emily drifted near the wall, her silence a steadying anchor. Behind them, a handful of recruits, tired eyes, hollow shoulders, uniforms that didn't fit anymore, shifted with the unease of those who had been told they were expendable. They looked to me not as commander, but as proof that erasure can be undone. Jason's voice broke the hush. "Is this a base?" His question carried both doubt and a plea. I let the morning rest between us before answering. "No," I said, my voice even. "It's a beginning." The words tasted like stone polished smooth by tide, something older than command. Shoulders loosened in the group, the first cracks in a wall built from rejection. I walked deeper, every step echoing across concrete that once bore engines and orders. At the center beneath the highest beam, I pinned a faded white flag. It was stitched by my own hands, not with colors of rank, but with plain thread spelling two words: the forgotten. Fabric whispered as it caught the air, not proud, not defiant, simply present. For those of us, erased visibility itself was rebellion. Emily's eyes lifted, catching the light in a way that almost looked like tears, though she never let them fall. Jason tilted his head back, breathing out something like relief. Around us, the recruits straightened, not in formation, but in belonging. No cadence barked, no whistle pierced. Only breath, uncoerced, shared. I drew out the envelope Mercer had slid to me days before. Its edges were worn soft, its seal plain, unadorned. Inside lay a single sheet, Graves's handwriting pressed deep into paper. You weren't trained to lead. You became a leader by surviving. The ink shook nothing in me, yet it steadied everything. I folded it carefully, slid it into the back of my notebook. Not for evidence this time, but for memory. The sea crashed faintly beyond the wall's rhythm, steady like an oath repeated without end. Sunlight widened, touching each face. For the first time in years, no one flinched from being counted. I looked at them, Jason, Emily, the disillusioned recruits, whose files had been stamped unfit, and felt the silence reshape itself not into absence, but into promise. A knock came at the half-open door. Soft, hesitant, the sound of someone still deciding whether hope could be trusted. A young recruit leaned in, shoes, worn voice barely more than a whisper. Can I stay? I've carried silence longer than medals, and I've learned that dignity isn't given, it's built one breath at a time. If this story has touched you, I ask you to share your thoughts about me not as a soldier alone, but as someone who chose to stand when it was easier to vanish. Leave your words so I'll know how my struggle resonates with you. In your own life, remember this: rejection is not the end. Let every slight become fuel. Let every closed door remind you to build one that others can enter.